Historically, marketing theory viewed consumer purchasing as a simple machine: insert a stimulus, an advertisement or a price drop, and extract a direct, rational response. But subject that straight line to actual human variables, and the mechanism shatters. Human beings rarely make purchase decisions in a vacuum of pure logic. Between a company's tactical inputs and the final transaction sits a dense, non-linear processing filter. Marketing science calls this the model of consumer behavior. This filter explains anomalies that defy objective reasoning, such as how a red visual tint completely overrides a wine expert's olfactory and taste receptors. It identifies specific advantages, allowing local upstarts like Patanjali to achieve billion-dollar dominance over global giants, leverages rooted in pre-existing cultural notes we'll see mapped out later. And it explains the paradox of a buyer using a complex mathematical matrix to evaluate one category, only to abandon logic entirely and rely on gut instinct for another. To decode this behavior, we have to isolate the filter's two distinct layers: inherited sociological characteristics and real-time psychological processing. Analyzing this architecture reveals the specific logic behind why objective data is weighed, distorted, and eventually converted into a purchase. The outermost layer of the consumer filter is built from cultural and social characteristics. Macrostructural variables dictate the baseline parameters of what someone will consider buying. In individualistic societies, consumers are more likely to seek out trends and multi-channel deals to serve themselves, whereas collectivist cultures prioritize long-term brand reputation and family-centric shopping in trusted physical stores. Beneath culture sits social class. In places with rigid socioeconomic stratifications, these divisions dictate which brands serve as utility and which serve as essential status signaling. However, these rigid boundaries temporarily destabilize when an individual enters a completely new phase of their psychological life cycle. Major life events, a career change, geographic relocation, or expectant parenthood, create a highly elastic state of brand loyalty. A new parent suddenly requires a massive influx of specialized goods, furniture, and financial services, stripping away their previous purchasing habits. Industry marketers refer to this as the first-in, first-win opportunity. By reaching parents early with targeted, reassuring products, like these specialized garments, a brand secures trust during a highly vulnerable transition window. Intercepting a consumer at the onset of one of these life cycle transitions is mathematically more efficient than trying to break an entrenched competitor's loyalty years later. Once a product passes the sociological baseline, it hits the psychological layer of the filter. Here, memory and perception act as gatekeepers to logic. Cognitive psychologists use the associative network memory model to map this. Brand knowledge is not stored as isolated data points. It exists as an interconnected web of nodes and links. An activation process spreads from node to node. When someone reads a brand name, the network automatically links that entity to unrelated anchors, like national identity or personal fitness goals. To control this network, companies anchor their brand to an external figurehead. This is how Patanjali achieved billion-dollar growth. By linking its products to founder Baba Ramdev, the brand utilized his existing fame as a yoga guru to create a direct, high-trust associative path into the consumer's mind. Similarly, associating Adidas with an athlete like Lionel Messi downloads his attributes, excellence and athletic dominance, directly into the brand's memory node. While memory provides the internal database for a brand, perception governs the intake of new data through selective attention and selective distortion. A University of Bordeaux experiment provided empirical proof of selective distortion in action. Wine science students were given a glass of white wine and a second glass containing the exact same white wine tinted with an odorless red dye. The visual presence of the red dye completely severed the subject's ability to process accurate olfactory data. They described the tinted glass using standard red wine descriptors. Their prior beliefs about what red wine should taste like forced them to distort the incoming sensory data to match their expectations. Because perception supersedes objective reality, a marketer's primary task is programming the consumer's associative network, rather than simply iterating the product. If a product successfully navigates the psychological filter, it enters the evaluation phase, where the consumer theoretically weighs the pros and cons of available options. For high-involvement purchases, this rational processing is mapped by the expectancy value model. This chart shows a compensatory model. In this framework, a product's high score in one attribute can mathematically cancel out a poor score in another. Here, 4 laptops are evaluated across memory, graphics, size, and price. The consumer assigns a weighted importance to each variable based on their specific needs, prioritizing memory capacity at 40% while reducing price to just 10% of the total decision. By multiplying these weights by the consumer's belief about each attribute, we calculate perceived value. Laptop A yields an objective total of 8.0. If human beings were strictly rational calculators, the product with the highest compensatory score would win every single time. But running an expectancy value calculation across a dozen products demands an unsustainable amount of time and cognitive load. When faced with a massive total set of options, like an aisle containing dozens of nearly identical goods, choice overload visually and cognitively paralyzes the consumer, forcing them to abandon the mathematical matrix. To survive this decision fatigue, they default to non-compensatory models and mental shortcuts known as heuristics. When time is constrained, a buyer will bypass evaluating new data entirely and simply grab the brand connected to their strongest associative memory node. When cognitive load exceeds capacity, the rational valuation phase shuts down, leaving the consumer highly susceptible to environmental nudges. Pulling back, we see that the sociological and psychological layers form the precise environment through which the actual purchase process must travel. Traditionally, the buying decision is mapped as a 5-stage linear flowchart, from problem recognition to post-purchase behavior. In theory, a recognized need triggers a search, delivering options into the evaluation stage. But apply human friction and the linear progression breaks. The consumer decision journey is highly iterative. It constantly loops backward, as selective distortion and cognitive fatigue alter the evaluation parameters in real time, forcing the buyer to reevaluate their options. The discipline of choice architecture leverages these specific feedback loops. By designing the environment in which decisions are structured, marketers can subtly nudge consumer behavior without restricting options. Ultimately, effective marketing strategy does not rely on arguing objective product superiority. It relies on aligning your brand with the consumer's pre-existing memory network and engineering a path of least cognitive resistance.